what I have to tell you might make you more valuable today for the cause of prosperity and liberty. I sent by email maybe Sunday night a link to Dave Crockett, who proposes that if we have a 18 billion dollar, 12 to 18 billion dollar mass transit system between Chattanooga and North Atlanta, that we would be well on our way to becoming the independent city state that he thinks is possible, that I think is possible. And it would be a transformative event, one that he has worked on for years, sort of as minister without portfolio, trying to get the parties together, though city government, Mayor Andy Burke, and others in office in the area care not for it at all. I sent him a link about a Cato paper called "The Coming Transit Apocalypse," and it's worth considering in light of the efforts of Megan Barry of Nashville to have a $5 billion underground rail system in that mid-sized city, Tennessee's largest city, but it's really just a mid-sized city that has a lot of charm and a lot of small-scale ways about it there on the hills in Davidson County. Randall O'Toole is the analyst, and he says that there's been a $1 trillion spent on mass transit, but the number of trips from 50 runs a year in 1970 are down to 39 a year today. So he says with annual subsidies of $50 billion, covering 76% of its costs, public transit may be the most heavily subsidized consumer-based industry in the country. Since 1970, the industry has received over $1 trillion adjusted for inflation in subsidies, yet the number of transit trips declines from 50, as I said, in 1970 to 39 per year. That's a per year figure today. Total transit ridership, not just per capita, is declining today, having seen a 4.4% drop nationwide from 2014 to 2016. And then on top of that, a 3% drop in the first 7 months of 2007 versus the same time frame in 2016. Major transit systems have suffered catastrophic declines in the past few years. There are some trends that are working against it, Dave. Low energy prices, growing maintenance backlogs, especially for rail transit systems, unfunded pensions and healthcare obligations, and then ride-sharing services such as Uber. And we have now the prospect also of self-driving, self-directed cars. And what should the public transit sector do? This policy analysis by Cato Institute proposes an orderly phase out of publicly funded transit services. That would be, for example, CARTA in Chattanooga. Public transit as affordable shared driverless cars become available in the next decade. This means that the industry should stop building new lines. It should replace most existing rail lines with buses as they wear out, pay down its debts and unfunded obligations, and target any further subsidies to low-income people rather than continue a futile crusade to attract higher-income people out of their cars. People are not going to be getting out of their cars. It's not going to happen. And we should be careful about this. There's going to be, just by the way, this coming weekend at UTC, the Southward Literary Festival, that will be including noted writers, including one I'm greatly interested in, Wendell Berry, who's written numerous short novels and stories, poems, and essays, and we'll be in Chattanooga. The tickets are $25 for a one-day student pass to $90 for a two-day general admission to Southward. They're available online at southernlitalliance.org. That's southernlitalliance.org. So I hope maybe in the coming week I can just kind of dip back into my volumes of Wendell Berry, who has one of his very fine essays is called it's about local economy and the whole idea of local economy and how it is a counterpoint to nationalization and internationalization of the economy, of capital flows, effectively a dehumanization of life. These are systems which they don't have to lead to individual dehumanization, but which have an effect of doing just that. And that's a literary conference where some of these points will come up. The idea of localism, the ideas of geocentrism, no doubt, will be explored by these authors. The southern writers are known for their interest in place, and that will be a conference that will look at many parts among poets and playwrights and poets and authors looked at by these people and their patrons and readers. It is a rare and intimate opportunity, the Times Free Press says in its story today, a rare event to dig into the world of Southern literature with the people who create it. That would be, as I mentioned, Wendell Berry and others. There's a story at Tennessee Star, the new Nashville conservative news platform, about Diane Black. She's running for the Senate, and there's a lawsuit that might bear some telling about between her and a former rival named Luann Zelenik. They were both candidates in the 2010 primary for Congress. Of course, Diane Black won, as John Harris, an attorney in Nashville, explains that during that race, Luann Zelenik's campaign ran an advertisement that asserted that David Black's company, Aegis, that's Diane's husband's company, Aegis, had received $1 million in Tennessee contracts after Diane Black became a state legislator previous to that race. Well, during the campaign, the Blacks apparently decided to have Aegis sue Luann Zelenik, claiming that her campaign ad was false and defamatory. It was filed in Davidson County, and Luann Zelenik won the case, as both the trial court and the Court of Appeals found that the assertion in the ad that Aegis had received a state contract was both true and not defamatory, not something that is a defaming thing to say. Of course, the lawsuit was not about any real damage to Aegis, and the Blacks knew it was true. The lawsuit clearly appears from the court records to have been a political tool, John Harris says, during the election to influence votes and to win. After Luann Zelenik won the defamation claim, she then sued Aegis for malicious prosecution. And that lawsuit has affidavits from people such as May Beavers, who is also running for governor, addressing how Diane Black used her position as a state senator to pass legislation that created special exemptions for her husband's company. The second lawsuit is pending in Davidson County and is a public record, and the trial by jury is set for 2018. And he says, if you want to see how corrupt the Blacks are, go to the readings or go to the pleadings in the court record and find out for yourself. There's a story, as I mentioned, it's a story at Tennessee Star, which is TennesseeStar.com, and do make note of that. I suggest that people who are in Congress can't be honest. And here we have Diane Black running for the federal Senate. There's a story at Breitbart.com that I think is worth mentioning, though I don't often get to the national story. I want to mention one that's about a new book by the former editor of the New York Times Magazine. His name is Edward Klein, and he quotes a field report from the FBI that talks about how the bureaucracy, the people who run the government, who are in the executive branch in the federal agencies, are sort of at war with the federal president. The Bureau has gotten actionable intelligence that there is within the federal government a growing and organized movement to block or interfere with administration policy decision. This is an FBI report, and it's being quoted in a new book called All Out War, The Plot to Destroy Trump. There have been regular organized meetings of large numbers of government workers at a church in the Columbia Heights area of the district, that's the District of Columbia, where plans have been discussed to actively sabotage government programs they disagree with, the report says. These would include immigration enforcement, crackdown on welfare fraud, and any weakening of environmental rules. Plus, there is concern that some dissenting government workers might be dislodged from their positions by the Trump administration. The number is 800-8949, 800-8949. There's evidence that while there's a great deal of agitation within the government, there are non-government individuals associated with unions and immigration and environmental groups who are behind these meetings. Legal groups have been teaching some of these government employees that they can get away with what they can get away with doing in terms of delaying enforcement, and that they cannot in terms of refusing to obey orders, which would constitute going on strike and get them dismissed under civil service rules. One management level employee said, bureaucrats are going to delay, drag their feet, and throw roadblocks in the way of unconscionable actions by the Trump White House. It is going to become impossible to get these actions done. There's a quote from Schumer. I'm sure you've heard Chuck Schumer, the Senate Minority Leader. You've heard it before. Let me tell you, you take on the intelligence community, they have 6 ways from Sunday at getting back at you. That's widely quoted. So even for a practical, supposedly hard-nosed businessman, Trump's being really dumb to do this. And Newt Gingrich, who also believes in the deep state, says, of course the deep state exists. There's a permanent state of massive bureaucracies that do whatever they want and set up deliberate leaks to attack the president. This is what the deep state does. They create a lie, spread a lie, fail to check the lie, and then deny that they were behind the lie. And the Interior Department, Environmental Agency, Protection Agency, and the Department of Justice are mentioned by Edward Klein, the former editor of the New York Times Magazine and the author of numerous books. And the most recent one that is being quoted here in Breitbart is All Out War, the plot to destroy Trump, the plot to destroy Trump. Well, this is David Tulis, and I'm glad you're giving me just a couple minutes of your time. There's signs from David Stockman who's author of a very good book that I gave a great deal of attention to reading. As a book about the malformation of the American economy by the Fed. It's kind of a history of the Fed and a history of the nationalization of the economy and the financialization of the economy. Financialization is just another way of saying how much of the economy, much of the gain in the economy is not based on real productivity, real capitalism, the real free market, but rather by gambling on gyrations in the paper money valuations and in the insurance markets. That's where, and in the highly abstractified world of betting on ups and downs of particular players or industries in the real economy, you could say. And Stockman has an essay that's out today. It's off of his website, for which you have to have a subscription to get. But sometimes he frees up items from Contra Corner and puts them out on LouRockwell.com. And he's confident that there's a fiscal calamity just ahead. That there's something that will shatter the foundations of the financial system. And he says that it's certain because there's no Republican will in the Congress to fight these deficits. He mentions 3, Amash, Massey, and Jones, and he says they threw in the towel yesterday on what amounts to an $11.5 trillion 10-year deficit that will take the national debt to nearly $33 trillion, or 140% of gross domestic product by 2017. And then on the very last page of his essay, in which he always has very vigorous and spicy language, he says, but as we have observed, there are no fiscal conservatives left in the GOP. And many of those who might have stood up to the impending $33 trillion national debt monster have, just like the Donald yesterday, been mugged by the deep state with its insidious regime of secrecy. Were the GOP backbenchers not so blinded and immobilized by the deep state, $400 billion could be whacked off the nation's bloated defense budget in a heartbeat, because that was enough for Eisenhower on the eve of JFK's tragic assassination. Is far more than enough today. That is, in a world that is actually far less threatening to the safety and security of the American homeland. It is only the lies and fear-mongering of the forces which broke down the Oval Office yesterday that keep the real truth about the nation's security from the Congress and the American people. Now, you say, okay, so what? Well, here's the last detail is about the Amazon gain. And you might say, well, these just don't connect. But the point that he's making is we're living in a kind of financial fantasy. We're living in a fantasy land where the government's going to take care of us, and where we have guarantees for this. We have FDIC guaranteeing our bank deposits, and we have Grandma Yellen, who's not probably going to keep her headship there at the Federal Reserve System. But we have a national economy that is not based in the real world. And here's his proof why. Okay, this 2 paragraphs. He says, for proof. Okay, 2 paragraphs. Just listen. For proof, you only need to look at today's $69 billion gain in Amazon's market cap, which brought its price earnings multiple to 239x. Okay, 239 times the price earnings ratio. After all, its operating income only declined by 40% from the year ago quarter. So you have a company that has an operating income that went down, and yet its price earnings ratio, which is a sign of its strength, went way beyond the normal. I think the normal PE is like 20 or 21. There's a very small number that's what's called safe and rational price earnings ratio. But we have a major player in the market that has that's being bought up by people. So the market's being led by just a handful of big companies such as Amazon. And there's not real strength in the American economy. There's not real strength undergirding the stock market. Well, this is David Tulis. I do appreciate you giving me just a couple minutes of your time. I've been thinking a lot about the idea of the events Saturday in Shelbyville and in Murfreesboro, Tennessee, that were a picture of the future. Okay, the picture of the future that we have is the security state, the state which always is working ahead to prevent bad things from happening. Right? I'm just exhausted in my mind. I'm exhausted in my spirit by the prospect of the police state, the security state. And we had the story of protesters and counter-protesters in these 2 cities. There was the pro-Southern nationalist group on one side, and then on the other, we had people who are sort of Antifa. They're kind of Marxist, communist, fascist. They call themselves anti-fascist, but they're really just kind of fascist. And the smaller groups were 160 in one city, and about 30 in the other. The counter protesters were 400 on one and 1,000 on the other, outnumbering the sort of pro-white, pro-South, the neo-Confederate, even neo-Nazi sympathizers in groups that are conveniently lumped together by the Southern Poverty Law Center as white supremacists. I don't think that's really fair, but they're all lumped together in that hateful term. And the counter-protesters, of course, all interested in freedom and democracy, outnumber them. Well, the story that really strikes me is that we can't have free speech when you have regulated speech. You can't have free speech when you have to go to a free speech zone. That's not free speech. When you're forbidden from being on a public venue, on a public sidewalk, and having your say. And what I propose is that we first understand the main dynamic of our time politically and legally, and that is the active state as opposed to the passive state. In my conception, in my life as a Christian, I've been thinking a lot about these issues. I've thought much of my adult life about these issues. How do we have prosperity, and how do we have liberty, and how do we understand properly our current situation, where we have high regulation of the participants of these 2 demonstrations. In my thinking, the free market would say the court, the police, the state are passive. They don't do anything to prevent crimes from happening. Right? They let things happen. If there's a crime in a protest, well, there certainly is going to be a record of it by everyone having his video on. Right? And so then the complainant, who's the victim, or an eyewitness, brings the perpetrator to the police and to the court. In the older model, in the free market model that Bastiat and the whole liberal, the whole classical liberal school believes in, that's me. I'm a classical liberal. Our idea is that the state should be passive. The state should be concerned about justice and not security. If the state is concerned about justice, it's passive. It doesn't set up barriers between participants. It doesn't have lines of police officers with steel helmets separating the participants of a demonstration, which is of a political and cultural nature. Rather, it's aside. It's not involved at all. It simply lets the free people of Tennessee and people visiting Tennessee who have constitutionally guaranteed rights to have their encounter, have their meeting, let them discuss noisily as they need to their differences of opinion. It does not stand between the people. It does not stand among the people. It stands aside, and it waits. That is the biblical model of justice, by the way. That is the biblical model of the state. The state is passive, and it runs the courts. In our county, the courts are protected by the sheriff. The sheriff has an ancient office, and originally his office was passive as well. It was there to protect the court and bring the prisoner to the judge and the jury for trial, and that was it. Now, though, we have a proactive state. We have government that is always reaching out ahead of itself, reaching out beyond its competencies to manage the economy, to manage protests, to manage free speech, right? To manage how people do things, how children are educated. That has to be managed as well. How people are to retire, how people are to save. This is all managed by the 401k system. And at every point in life, we have management interests in our homes, in our travels, in our public lives, in our businesses. There is always the state with its peremptory claim upon innocent and harmless human activity. And I think what we should complain about is the state being active. We should want it to be passive. Remember, the Israelites were warned by the prophet about having a chief executive. They wanted to be like the peoples around them and to have a king. And Samuel warned that if they had a king, he would be taking their lands, taking their children, imposing taxes, skimming from their crops, bringing them into wars, and being their oppressors. He warned them and promised them that would happen. And indeed, it did. And what they had originally was the passive state. They had the judicial state, where the court is there, and if there's a wrong or a crime, the court will hear the charges, but it won't intervene in the private sector. Yes, everywhere there's a yes. Yes, 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 yes. Every term there's a yes. Let people get together, let people protest, let people argue, let people convene, have meetings. It's yes to everything, and we're going to stay out of the way until there's a crime. Then we'll step in and hear the case. That's what we need to have. That's what we need to want, to have a better local economy and a better free market here in Chattanooga.
Traffic, news, and information. Nooga Radio, Digital FM 95.